Thank you, Madam Chair. This hearing is yet another transparent attempt to malign law-abiding Americans and American companies. My Democrat colleagues correctly note that there has been an increase in violent crime in this country over the past 3 years, but incorrectly claim that firearm manufacturers are contributing to or fueling violent crime. The laws of supply and demand apply to the firearms market in the same way that they apply to other markets. Firearm manufacturers are responding to demand from the American people who are experiencing dramatic increases in homicides and aggravated assaults in their communities. Americans who are seeking to protect themselves and their families, a right recognized in this country by our Second Amendment. Democrats in Congress continue to infringe on this right and to shame law-abiding companies who ensure that Americans have the means to protect themselves. I thank each of you for your testimony today. Ms. Okafor, thank you for the work that you do to promote safe and responsible firearm ownership. I appreciate your discussion of the relative merits of the AR platform. I discussed in the judiciary markup last week on this topic, which is interesting because these the chairs of this committee, of these two committees, are running against each other. So we have competing. We just do the same hearings back and forth. But I mentioned that my wife actually prefers the AR-15 because it is easier to handle. It's more stable for her. And in a case of defense and the need for stability and be able to respond under a stressful situation, she'd be more comfortable with an AR-15. The features of the AR-15 make it an incredibly viable weapon for defense. In your written testimony, Ms. Okafor, you discussed some of the recent trends in new firearm ownership. And before I ask you to discuss those with us, I'll tell you that I talked to multiple gun dealers, retailers in my district who tell me that the #1 new owner trend in my district are women who are Democrats, which I find interesting. Ms. Okafor, can you discuss the trends with us, please?
Absolutely. What I discussed earlier is that the fastest growing demographic of gun owners are African American women. And we've also seen, like as you said, with the fact that a lot of African American women tend to be a part of the Democratic Party. So it's honestly nothing to do with politics when it comes down to transcending politics, because this is a human right. There's nothing to do with you being a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian. It has to do with the fact that you understand your right to defend yourself, and you want to be able to do so. So many people in America are doing just that.
And you kind of discussed it, but what are you hearing is the rationale for these new demographics who are coming out and buying guns?
Particularly for women in general, what I've found many times, particularly other mothers, saying that they know that at the end of the day that it comes down to them to defend themselves, to defend their children, particularly during the pandemic when unfortunately there were in many instances where people weren't sure if they were going to have a police officer, police department get to them in time because of what was going on. So many people, including what was going on during that chaotic 2 years, found it necessary to then purchase a firearm, particularly for self-defense.
Mr. Daniel, Mr. Smith, what's your understanding about the motivations of Americans who are purchasing a firearm for the first time? Mr. Daniel, you first.
Mr. Congressman, I believe that people are buying, new gun owners who have never owned a gun before are buying firearms by the millions because they're afraid. They're afraid because of the violence they see in the riots. They're afraid because of criminals are not being prosecuted, and they're afraid because of the rise in crime that they see. And they are making a life decision to change from being a non-gun owner to a gun owner. And I suspect, sir, that they will also be making the decision, a life-changing decision in the way they vote.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Congressman, I agree with what we've heard from Ms. Okafor and Mr. Daniel. We are seeing a much greater increase of people purchasing firearms, particularly their first firearm, for the purchase of defending their homes and their person. Again, we saw that increase from the beginning of 2020 on as it related to things going on in our communities and our society, the COVID pandemic, defund the police movement and civil unrest, as well as the fact that we were entering an election cycle where the Second Amendment was on the ballot, and a lot of people felt that that was also a critical factor in a decision to purchase a firearm.
Thank you. Madam Chair, before you take my time away, I do have an article I would like to submit into the record.